Welcome back to the Hacking Autism podcast. Let me do that again. The Hacking Neurodivergence podcast. We are rebranding to be more inclusive because we know that individuals struggling with dyslexia, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, all the things, the brain works a little differently. And so we want to gather those stories of not just people that are officially on the spectrum, but people that think a little differently. And so in today's episode, we connect with Shelby, my dear friend. She's going to tell us her story and how she lives life on the autism spectrum. There's lots of good nuggets to gather from our conversation today. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Shelby. Welcome, Shelby. I'm excited to dig into your story and share with the audience how you've approached life with a neurodivergent mind. After hearing your story, we'll then wrap up with a lightning round of questions. How does that sound?
Sounds good, Kelsey.
First question, right off the bat, where in the world do you live?
So I live in the metro Atlanta area in Georgia in the USA.
Wonderful. And so when it comes to knowing you, what are some key things at a high level that the audience should know about you, Shelby?
I am a librarian. I am turning 30 this year and really excited about the end of my Saturn return. And I live with my partner of 2 years and my best friend of 6 years. And we're just a big queer happy family.
Wonderful. Now, when it comes to, living life with a divergent mindset, how did you maybe piece together that your brain might work a little different than everyone else's?
Ooh, I feel like other kids figured it out before I did. I don't even want to say always, but I don't remember a time when I didn't feel a little bit different from my peers. I was labeled gifted at a very early age, but never actually officially labeled autistic because I have not gathered the money and the time to go to an official autism doctor, TM, and get that label on myself. But my mom was always kind of like, you know what? They'll catch up. You'll feel closer to people your age when you're older and you'll feel much more similar to them. And then I got older and older and that just never happened. And when I finally started putting the pieces together of, hey, you might not just be a gifted kid trademark. You might have a neurodivergent brain in other ways, was when I was in college. My family, like a lot of families, for some reason, got really into the Big Bang Theory. I feel like nobody really understands that phase in American culture, and I certainly don't. But at the time, we were watching it all the time on DVD. And because my name is Shelby, and because they started noticing similarities between me and the character of Sheldon Cooper on the show, they started kind of jokingly calling me Sheldon. I've got my seat on the couch. I've got my very specific, very deep interests. I've got my difficulty understanding the difference between when people are being literal and when they're being figurative. And after a while of this happening, I was like, wait, do you guys think I might be autistic? And my mom was like, oh, you might be on the spectrum. Yeah. And I had a little crisis about that for a little bit. And to their credit, question mark, the nickname immediately stopped once I put the pieces together. But after that, I kind of started going through researching, started asking my mom questions like, hey, when did I start doing this as a child? When did I start doing that? And started asking adults around me, friends of mine who had been diagnosed with autism, hey, do you do this? Do you do that? And I started reading books, particularly Dr. Devin Price's Unmasking Autism, which has been incredibly valuable to me. And finally, I landed on, you know what? I like the label autistic a lot more than I like many of the other words that I have used to describe myself and that other people have used to describe me. it fits and it's not inherently negative.
So let's go back to people calling you Shelby, Sheldon. And so in that moment, of like, do you guys think I'm autistic? Did that feel negative in that moment? Did it neutral, like socially neutral, emotionally neutral? I'm curious how that felt at first.
Good question. It felt emotionally highly negative because Sheldon is not portrayed with a lot of sensitivity or sympathy on the show. And like I could see the regret in my mother's face of letting that nickname go on in that moment when I asked. And in the moment, I was like, I did feel a little bit negatively about it, but after researching and after learning more about what autism really is and how frequently it's missed in people who experience it differently than, you know, your stereotypical young white boy who's really into trains, I began to see it as a much more positive thing and as an inherently neutral thing that I experience positively now.
So if we go back, you had previously mentioned that maybe the school system had identified you as gifted. In what way did someone observe like a gift or a strength in you? Was it with like regards to your reading, your speaking? How were you classically gifted?
So I haven't actually done a whole lot of research into the gifted or not gifted labeling system in schools, just because I do know now that it is so biased in favor of people of certain socioeconomic classes. It's biased in favor of certain races over others. It's biased in favor of people who had access to care and education that maybe other kids didn't very young. But I think a lot of my gifted label did come from an early ability to read. And I believe that part of that came from hyperverbalism, which is a pretty classic thing that comes along with being autistic. I learned to read very early. And part of that was, again, probably a little predisposition toward being good with words. But part of that was because I am my mother's oldest child, and she had the good fortune to be able to stay at home with me for the first several years of my life. And while it was just me and her, she says that whenever we weren't doing something else, like running errands or out in the car, whatever, we were reading. And so I think lots and lots and lots of early exposure to books and early, very positive associations with books helped a lot in learning how to read and learning how to love to read.
I'm curious, with regards to that love for reading, did that possibly come as a way, as like a substitute maybe for friendships? Did you have any struggle with connecting with kids your age and therefore you like jumped to books? Or did you see that they went hand in hand? Like the books helped you then show up differently in your friendships? I'm curious.
I would say that I did struggle a little bit to form connections with kids my own age. Adults were always telling me, oh, you're so mature for your age. You're such an old soul, which is a fun way to tell a child that they're different and that their peers might have trouble relating to them.
Oh, Shelby, I feel so seen.
I'm glad for that. I really am, but also I'm sorry. And I did have a little trouble connecting with kids my own age. And I do think that sometimes like disappearing into books was a way of coping. But later, and by later, I mean as early as second grade, when I met my very best friend in the whole world, it was a way to connect with other kids. I met my friend Kat when we were 7, and she is, I hesitate to put a label on her just because she doesn't like to put a label on herself, but she is definitely a person I can connect with on a neurodivergency level. And she saw me reading so much and saw me not only enjoying it, but getting praise for it, and was like, I'm going to do that. And has told me that she read and read and read and read specifically to catch up with me, which was actually really funny. And later we were kind of the pair. We were the ones kind of getting in trouble for reading under the desk when we should have been listening in class. And we were the ones talking about book characters like they were our friends. Later, we were the ones reading and writing a ton of fan fiction, so much fanfic. And later, like as I grew, that love of reading was what helped me find the other kids who loved reading or loved things as much as I did.
I love to hear that. I'm curious, did you have a couple of go-to series that you read elementary, middle school, high school that stand out?
Yes. So elementary school, those were my Harry Potter years, which I'm never going to forgive J.K. Rowling for the mess that she has become. But those were also the beginning of my dragon days, where every book that I read had a dragon on the cover. I also read every book in the Babysitter's Club series, so much that my school librarian, her daughter outgrew them, and she was like, hey, do you want this giant box of Babysitter's Club books? Because my kid doesn't want them anymore. And I was like, hell yeah. And that was delightful. Around that age, I was reading fantasy because I loved it, and I loved the world building and the lore and the idea that I might someday find a big sparkly egg in the middle of a field and get to bond with a dragon for the rest of my life. But I was reading more like contemporary realistic fiction because it gave me a map, because it showed me a way to be where the characters, who were usually girls, could be girls correctly in order to make friends and gain social cachet without being mean. And I read them in the way that I also read etiquette handbooks or advice columns or later 17 magazine, just looking for how to be a person.
Let me press on that a little bit further. So you're seeing these things as that blueprint, the instruction manual that you might not have been born with. Did you have social hiccups that then caused you to have this hunger for the instruction manual?
A little bit, yeah. Because even after meeting Kat and several other friends, I still felt a little bit of distance from my peers. And I think subconsciously I went looking for, well, how do people do this? And I found it a little, but also I didn't find everything I needed. Because you know what's missing from a lot of middle grade literature that was coming out in like 2002 to 2008? Gay people, anywhere, trans people, anywhere. And I could not see anybody in these books who like wanted to put perfume on a fan letter to Anne Hathaway, which is a real thing that I almost did when I was 8, until my mom was like, we don't do that for girls, inadvertently preventing me from doing the creepiest possible thing I could have done as an 8-year-old to a stranger. So thanks, Mom. And I didn't see how to maybe navigate being queer in any way. Like it just wasn't there. So that was something that was missing from the instruction manuals, heavy air quotes, that I was reading as a kid.
So you're reading these books, kind of realizing that you're different, labeled as gifted by teachers or educators. You go forward into college. What's your undergrad experience like?
Oh man, undergrad was actually really great because that was where I found the queer people. I joined the LGBTQ Pride Student Union as an 18-year-old thinking I'm going to be the best straight ally ever. And that, as it often is for best straight allies ever, just was not the case. But I did make wonderful friends, had very, oh God, what even is the word? I had these connections with people that were new and different and joyful and ridiculous. I feel very lucky to have had the undergraduate experience that I had, because even with the drama and the difficulties and the stuff that always comes up with young adults, and some stuff that doesn't always come up with young adults that came up with me, I felt loved and I felt supported and I felt community authentically.
Did that feel like it was in stark contrast to your high school experience?
A little bit, yeah. Because in my high school experience, I was still trying to follow the blueprint, you know?
Sure.
I was still trying to emulate the characters that I was reading about, just because I didn't know how to be myself in a way that would not get immediately rejected. And
So let me ask you then. So if you're in that larger community at college, were they kind of helping you tear up that blueprint of like, screw the blueprint, it doesn't matter. Like, let's all live life and like, love one another well in this larger community versus like in school, your primary person sounds like was Kat.
oh yeah, and Kat, in a way that I, looking back, admire so much, did not follow the blueprint or encourage me to follow the blueprint. She was always doing her own thing. And that scared me, I think, sometimes when I was in high school. And we fought about it sometimes. We grew up like sisters. We fought like sisters. We squabble a little bit today, but she has always been someone who accepted me exactly as I am, which was scary when I was not a person who accepted me exactly as I am.
Fair. In terms of like the disagreements that you would have amongst yourselves, was it because you wanted acceptance from the popular kids or like, Kat, why are you making things so difficult? Or I'm curious what that disconnect was of what you were seeking or wanted more of that you felt like Kat might be an obstacle to because Kat was so authentic to themselves.
Oh, it was never the popular kids. Like,
Or like, what about the
like
popular theater kids?
right. Yeah. Okay.
Right?
It was the drama nerds.
Of
And
course. Those power holders.
none of them are gay, right?
Never.
Never, ever.
That's the last place I'd look.
Right. Yeah. But I think some of the drama came from her wanting a different kind of social cachet, like the kind that looks really good on a college application, and me wanting the kind that looks good in a young adult novel about a whole bunch of theater kids.
Yep. No, I have a clear picture of the difference that those two perspectives would afford. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we each had a blueprint kind of imposed on us, and we each followed that blueprint pretty well. But I think the conflict arose when the blueprints didn't match, and when both of us really secretly wanted to be doing something different, but couldn't admit it to ourselves.
Fair. Okay, let's fast forward to you're doing research around the autistic mind. What does it mean to maybe have Asperger's or be neurodivergent? You're coming to the conclusion that this could be a positive thing.
Okay.
Was that a byproduct of hearing so many positive stories about these people being superstars, or how did you arrive? Most people don't arrive at like maybe the default conclusion that this is amazing, right? They usually start at like, this stinks. So tell me a little bit more about how you came to that assertion at the end that autism and being in this amazing people group could actually be a good thing for yourself.
So much of it was because I had so many wonderful friends who were autistic and are autistic. I didn't arrive at the conclusion that my autism could be a positive part of me until I knew and loved many people who were autistic.
So that exposure helped rewrite
Mhm.
the perspective or reframe it.
Yes. Yeah. I believe that we learn to love ourselves by loving others.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mm, mm.
and knowing scores of people who were different from each other and leading different lives, but all had this one thing in common and who were all amazing in different ways, finally led me to the conclusion that, like, yeah, this could be me.
I
And that
love
could be
that.
good. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, coming to a place of self-acceptance can be so challenging, and I mean, people spend decades trying to walk that walk, and yet how beautiful to, like, see the beauty in others and then apply a mirror and be like, "Oh, maybe I too could be beautiful because of the beautiful way that my brain works differently than the larger populace."
Yeah. And I want to be absolutely clear. I have not arrived at a place of complete self-love and self-acceptance. And I don't know that anybody ever does, except maybe that one amazing lady from Humans of New York who wears all chartreuse all the time and is having a beautiful time. Like, I don't know if you've ever looked up the Green Lady in New York City, but she's fabulous. And I aspire to that level of fabulousness.
I love that. I recently was listening to a podcast and they talked about how they looked at and watched old people and
Mhm.
how older individuals tend to not care about fashion
Yes.
or their footwear, right? Because they just like don't care, or they've gotten to the place where, life is short. They're
Mhm.
towards the tail end and they want to prioritize comfort. And this person asserted that if that's where I'm going to go when I'm 70, if that's the belief I'm going to have about myself, why don't I apply that to myself when I'm 30, 40, and
Mhm.
like just get to that radical acceptance of
Yeah.
myself versus like wait till I'm 70 or 80 to be at
Right.
peace.
Yes, I absolutely agree. E. Jean Carroll is rapidly becoming one of my role models. She actually just won like $82 million in a lawsuit, a defamation lawsuit. Yeah, against the orange man who must not be named.
Got it.
And
Mm-hmm.
she has been writing advice columns for a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
you look at her, she looks fabulous. Her style is well developed and her writing style is witty and totally unique. And I think what I most aspire to is that level of embracing yourself and enjoying being yourself. I, like a lot of queer autistic people, bonded strongly to Steven Universe when it was first coming out.
Who's
That
that? I'm not
okay?
sure. I'm not
Oh, Steven
familiar.
Universe. It's. It feels so funny to be explaining this. It is a TV show on Cartoon
Okay.
Network that was developed by Rebecca Sugar, who is a queer person themselves. It is about a young boy named Steven, last name Universe, who is being raised by non-binary alien rocks from outer space. Yes, it's an extremely textually gay TV show. And I think something that's funny that is happening with queer people of my age is that we bond very strongly to cartoons, like think Legend of Korra, Adventure Time,
Mm-hmm.
Steven Universe, because the Owl House, they are beginning to be textually and joyfully queer in a way that many TV shows created for adults haven't gotten to yet. We're on the Princesses of Power. There's another one, Nimona. I'm like just running down this list, but the closest that I can think of in terms of adult media is Our Flag Means Death, which is the gay pirate TV show with Taika Waititi. And
Really?
yeah,
I would not have guessed that that's what that show was about, given the title of
oh my
that
God,
show.
yeah. Go
I
and
was
watch
thinking it
it
was
and
about the
maybe get a
American military. I thought it was
no, right? But no, go on HBO Max and watch it and maybe like put on social media that you'd like it to get revived, because it did just get tragically canceled after 2 seasons. But yeah, queer autistic joy. That's what I want my life to be about.
I love that. And so, what keeps you busy right now?
So I'm a librarian, as I mentioned at the top. I manage a small team, and I do my best to make sure that everybody is taken care of. I think that librarianship is a great career if you are neurodivergent, if you're on the autism spectrum, just because so much of it is about organization of information and organization of objects, as well as serving the public with an expectation that you're going to be a little weird. People do not expect librarians to be normal in the same way that they expect people in other professions to be quote unquote normal. And I love that people walk into interactions with me knowing that I'm going to be a little weird, and it's going to be fine because I can help.
I'm curious, when you look at your coworkers, do you think that some of your coworkers are neurodivergent, many or any?
I don't
many,
have
most?
to hypothesize because many have told me that they are.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so, Ray, you talked about how it can really be a benefit and a strength of yours, given the way that your mind works. What are things that you struggle with that might be a challenge because of your neurodivergent brain?
Oh, any conversation where somebody means something other than what they're literally saying with their words is a problem for me. Like, if I could wear a sign that says, use your words just everywhere, I would do that. And I would hope that it would improve a lot more of my interactions than it would materially harm.
I say use your words to my husband. It's so funny. I thought that was the only one. And that's the beauty of the show, right?
Yeah.
Is like, right, you see some of yourself in other people and you're like, aha, I
Mhm.
am not alone.
No.
And so, I mean, that's amazing. And I'm curious, when you find yourself being overstimulated, what's something that you do or use to help self-regulate? Do you crack open a book, or do you have any hacks or suggestions when you find yourself being overwhelmed or flooded?
Okay. So when I notice myself going to that overwhelmed place, very frequently what I do is I reread. Like, sometimes it's hard for me to go to something new when I'm feeling flooded. So I will go to something old and familiar that I know that I love, that I know that I will love from start to finish. And sometimes I discover new things about that, doing that. In the past few years, I have found that graphic novels and especially manga are delightful when I'm in a place of maybe feeling overstimulated, just because I love visual art almost as much as I love the written word. And it's also really easy to distract yourself from feeling overwhelmed or flooded when you're hitting not just verbal stimulation, but visual stimulation.
Say more about that
Okay.
a little bit further.
So graphic novels and manga have been growing in popularity for the past few years. And I think a lot of people, particularly parents, worry that their kids won't develop the same ability to read if they're reading graphic novels versus reading a traditional print novel. And my response to that, as somebody who has a master's degree in library and information science, is they're just developing different skills. Visual learning and verbal learning, they're different, but I think they're equally valuable. And learning to read an image is valuable for so many reasons, helping identify facial expressions. Oh my God, is that helpful to a lot of people who are autistic? Learning to identify visual metaphors, visual motifs, the composition of an image and how that can affect your mind and your feelings. Can you imagine a world where we were more able to read images and therefore better able to analyze advertising in print or on television or on YouTube, where we were more able to critically analyze, okay, why does this element placed here induce this thought or emotion in myself? What is it intended to do? What is the author's intent here? And we do that in English literature classes with words. Why does the use of this word over that one induce this feeling rather than that feeling? But we don't necessarily get the same opportunity to do that with images. And verbal stimulation, whether that's auditory or visual, stimulates different parts of the brain and teaches different things than visual stimuli via pictures. Is any of this related to what you just asked me? Because I feel like I just went off on like a librarian science tangent.
That's okay. I mean, it was very, very interesting especially because I know and have heard of parents being worried about their kids, consuming too many graphic novels, equating it to video games or any number of things. And yet there can be that hidden side, right? Video games, maybe someone's talking with more people than they normally would because they're gaming, with someone. And so it just goes to show that things can be, right? If you look a click below the surface, there's actually more than meets the eye.
Yeah. So, and like rolling back this conversation to where you originally asked that question and having that stimulus coming at me from multiple directions helps a lot when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like when I used to work out, because I didn't walk 3 miles a day at work trying to help people find books about bees, I used to distract myself from the fact that I was working out and doing cardio by watching anime, because it was stimulating on a number of different levels. I was watching the originals with subtitles. So I was reading in English, I was hearing Japanese, and I was visually seeing pictures. And that was enough to trick my brain into thinking we weren't on an elliptical.
So it sounds like you overload your senses, and the overloading of your senses yields calm and tranquility. That is fascinating. I've never heard of that approach, which is, again, the whole heart of the podcast is to share some of those strategies. So that's maybe I should try that.
Yes.
For me, I like to reduce the modalities and be in my bed, Kindle Paperwhite, dark mode, 11:30 at night. And for me, that's like my meditation, because if I start thinking about work, the story that I'm looking at does not move forward. And so I'm the opposite in that way. But yeah, it's really exciting to hear of a different way to hack like that overwhelm.
Yeah, I am so much on like the sensory seeking side of the spectrum.
Sure.
After a meltdown, getting like sensory overloaded again actually helps a lot. Putting on that weighted blanket, grabbing that fidget cube and just working it for all it's worth, just getting as much physical sensation as I possibly can helps me get grounded back in my body, where other people want to just not be touched at all by anything.
You mentioned meltdowns. It made me think of masking. Do you find yourself doing much masking these days, or do you find yourself in a place in, the people that you surround yourself with or the workplace that you are employed at, like where you don't have to mask? Or how do you think about masking or not masking at this stage in your life?
In a management position, I find myself doing a little more metaphorical masking than I might if I were maybe in more of an individual contributor position. But at a library, I do find myself metaphorically masking less than when I have worked in other places. It's interesting because, like I said earlier, people kind of expect you to be a little weird when you're a librarian. Like they go into the interaction thinking, this is a special kind of person, and they think of it positively. And I love that because it allows me to speak in the way that makes the most sense to me, to move in the way that makes the most sense to me. It also helps that I wear a very literal physical mask every day to work because I take an immunosuppressant, and we're still in a pandemic because I make really big faces. This is something that you've known about me for a long time, and I appreciate that you've called it out in a very positive way. But wearing the literal mask keeps me from having to metaphorically mask so much because it means that I can make the face without anybody seeing me make the face.
Sure. Sure. They're only seeing your eyes and eyebrows.
They are, yeah.
Oh, I am curious, going back to the pandemic, what was a key strategy you employed for navigating a period of, massive social isolation? Yeah, just looking back at like the real height of it, how did you navigate it as someone that was neurodivergent?
Well, it drastically reduced the anxiety that I suffered from fear of social interaction because I wasn't having any. But I did also feel lonely. And so cultivating online relationships was something that helped a lot with that. It didn't totally fix the issue, but it did help. And having virtual therapy with like a licensed clinical social worker has helped me so much. Generally speaking, I am a big fan of therapy with LCSWs, and I recommend that to anybody who is considering looking at clinical therapy. Just being able to communicate in a variety of ways with people that I care about was, I think, the thing that carried me through. And a big part of what got me through with what little of my sanity I had at the beginning still mostly intact was living with my other best friend. Their name is Lee, and they are just a lifesaver in every sense of the word. They have ADHD, and I find that as an autistic person, I frequently get along best with people who have ADHD. It's kind of like how they put cheetahs and dogs together in zoos. Yeah.
That's amazing. Keep going. Okay.
And, we have known each other for so long and gotten along so well. I feel like I really lucked out knowing them and living with them because I know so many people who had relationships or friendships with people who they lived with just completely explode or fizzle out. And if anything, I think Lee and I got closer.
How did you find your Lee? Because maybe people hear that and they're like, oh gosh, that sounds amazing. Like, is there a bar that we go to that you went to in Orlando? Like, I'm just curious. How did you find them?
Okay. So we actually met on a dating app and we dated for over a year, moved in together and went, oh no, this is platonic. And we care about each other so much. But I think just because of the way that we met, we thought, well, okay, this has to be a romantic connection. And realizing that it wasn't was hard. But I think we also looked at each other and went, we don't have to not know each other just because we're breaking up. And once we moved into a new place with 2 bedrooms, we just basically continued on as we always had. It was a friendship from the beginning and it kept being that way.
I love that.
I almost feel like that's not helpful to anybody who's hoping to find their person just because I feel like we got really lucky. But we also did a very clear thing of confusing platonic connection with romantic connection. So if you're out there and that's a thing that happened to you, you should know that it doesn't have to end in tragedy. And it doesn't have to end in a big explosive breakup. It can just be like acknowledging how it was the whole time and adjusting to reflect that.
I love that. And I think even if it's hard for someone to try to like replicate or plagiarize what you did, I think I love to use the word plagiarism because it's so emotionally charged. But if like someone wanted to plagiarize Shelby's life and call it their own,
I would
I
ask
think
you to
it's
cite
just
your sources because I'm a librarian.
yes, MLA APA,
Oh,
Chicago.
Chicago.
Oh, you're so judgy. I actually have no opinion. I always used easybib.com.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Um,
Great resource. Big fan.
Gosh, but also, yeah, we will talk about academic papers another time.
Oh.
But what it could do is it could give and cast a vision, right? That like it is possible that, you know what, if it happened for one person, it might happen for me, or like
Yes.
this relationship didn't work out, but it doesn't mean that you never speak to the person again. Like there is a sample size of at least one
Oh,
with
yeah.
Shelby
Yeah.
that, it did carry forward in the years to come since you guys were romantically involved.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I have had relationships that ended that run the gamut from, best friends and we still lived together 6 years later to if I saw you at a party, I would turn around and leave.
There
But,
are those people.
oh, totally. But I think that it is a good sign when someone maintains a positive relationship with one or more people that they've been involved with in the past. So if you're friends with your ex and people are giving you the business about it, you don't have to take that as a sign that you've done something wrong.
I would agree. I ended up marrying that guy. Two proposals and one marriage later.
Awesome.
I even reached out and I said, like, you know what, I'm sorry I didn't let you know like how awesome you were. And then he's like, hey, you want to go on another date? And we've been married for almost 12 years.
That's awesome.
So you never know. You never know. What starts out as one thing could end up as another. Before we wrap and go into our lightning round of questions, anything else that you want to share with the audience in terms of living the neurodivergent life and how you've hacked it, how you've used it, maybe as an unfair advantage? Any other bonus stories that you might want to share with us?
Being the person who sends the uncomfortable thing is not only okay, but often really great. If you're in a position where you're made to feel uncomfortable and other people are being made to feel uncomfortable, it is good to be able to call that out. Now, be respectful, try your best to use the language that the other person is going to hear, but also that like complex relationship with authority that we as autistic people are sometimes predisposed to have can be a wonderful thing. And it can be a thing that makes you a better leader if that's where you want to go in life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I was in high school in particular, I really loved speaking the truth to power, and I did not speak that truth in love at all. Right? It was just
That's
well,
a thing. That's the
they have
thing.
a bad haircut. I need to tell them.
Oh no.
And right, but then that also makes you a lot of enemies. Right? Just at a shallow haircut level. I mean, obviously there's so many more examples, but it's I think similarly to you, it's finding the right modality to share that feedback in the right way, sharing the heart of like, well, this is why I'm speaking up. Like, this is the framework I'm applying to this versus I just want to make trouble to make trouble. And so that's great that you call that out in terms of how you try to walk that line. With that, we will now pivot into our lightning round.
Okay, go.
What's the last great book you've read?
The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Córdoba.
So many words. What made that book so freaking good?
I love an epic. I love magical realism. I love flowers blooming where they shouldn't.
Okay. You've piqued my interest. I might have to add that to my Amazon cart. And next question is, What advice would you give your younger self, living the life and the experience that you have today?
Mhm.
What would you tell 15-year-old Shelby?
Oh, 15. 15. It is okay not to be dating anyone. That's allowed. That's fine. I know that none of the books that you read are over until everybody's paired off, but like you can just not be dating anyone, and that is a neutral thing to do.
I love that. Next up, what is your favorite neurodivergent purchase? So, as someone that is neurodivergent, what's something that you have or you bought or you made that's really benefited you?
I have an unabashed love for all things plush. You saw me before we started recording, just moving a ton of stuffed animals around because I didn't necessarily want all of them to have their moment on YouTube. But I have them and I love them and I'm going to keep spending money on them.
I love that.
Yeah.
Next up, what's a song, playlist, or artist that you keep on repeat? What are you listening to most these days?
Ooh, I love Dessa. Dessa. I saw her live when she was touring with Welcome to Night Vale, which has been one of my favorite podcasts for about a decade now. And she puts on an amazing show and is, sure, from all accounts that I've ever heard, an amazing person. I am astounded by her lyrics anytime I hear something new. Go listen to her if you like that stuff.
Wonderful. Next up, what do you think is the best advice you've received from someone else in your life? Maybe it's just a phrase that you repeat to yourself. It could be a mantra.
Okay. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Is something that
more.
which is something that I apply specifically to self-care and to cleaning. It is so much better to just run a wet washcloth over your face than it is to go to bed in your makeup. It is so much better to just stand under the water for 10 minutes than it is to not shower at all. It's so much better to change into different pajamas than to not change your clothes. And if you can, it is the opposite of the school system. Nearly every other arena of your life functions in the opposite way. It is so much better to get something done in a way that maybe isn't perfect than it is to just not do something at all.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for the time today, Shelby. And thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me, Kelsey. Always good to talk to you.
Hey guys, before you go, I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of Hacking Neurodivergence. And if you would be so kind, it would mean the world if you would share this content with someone that you care about, someone that might have a brain that works a little differently. We here at the podcast believe that your perceived glitch really can be a gift, right? Taking that perspective of a glitch becoming a gift. So if that resonates with you, please follow this journey. We are back after a couple of year hiatus during COVID, and I'm so excited to be bringing this message to you and gathering friends from all over the world who think a little differently, and hopefully you resonate with some of their stories and it encourages you. That's my goal. That's the whole point of this show. And so please consider following, subscribing on YouTube and all the things. But more than anything, the highest compliment you can give us is to share this with your loved ones. So with that, thank you in advance for telling others about this awesome show. Talk to you guys soon.